Good evening, everybody. Sorry for making a video in the dark. But here we are. I'm driving again. And the question that our friend John Doe brought up was as follows. How is it possible for someone to convert to Judaism if their non-Jewish parents oppose their conversion to Judaism? And there are two answers to this. I'll give first kind of the cold legalistic answer, which and the way that John Doe expressed himself was that how do you convert to Judaism and not violate the commandment to love and honor your parents? So let's just go through that. So the first thing is there is no commandment to love your parents. That's the first part of the equation. There's a commandment to honor your parents, to fear your parents, but not to love your parents. And fear doesn't need to be like scared, but like to be in awe of them, to show them honor, to show them respect. And those are commandments within the Mosaic covenant. Within the Noahide covenant, there is no obligation to honor one's parents. It is a pious thing to do that one can be rewarded for immensely, even if one is not under the Mosaic covenant, even if one is not Jewish. If they honor their parents, they will be rewarded for honoring their parents, but they are not obligated to honor their parents the way that Jewish people are obligated to honor their parents. And it goes a little bit further, because let's say a Jewish person, his father is not Jewish and his mother is Jewish. He has no obligation in the cold legalistic sense to honor or fear or respect his father, who is not Jewish. And if his mother is in such a state of sin that she's married to a non-Jew, there's no obligation to honor her either, according to many opinions. To fear her would still seem to be an obligation, but not to honor her because she has shown herself not worthy of honor. Now we're talking here in the realm of obligation. Just because one is not obligated to do something doesn't mean meaning one is exempt from doing something. Doesn't mean that they're not allowed to do it. And so, and it also doesn't mean it's not a good thing to do it. And again, we have the commandment, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, that's usually translated as love thy neighbor. But the word re'ah doesn't mean neighbor, that's shochein. Re'ah means your fellow, in a certain sense. And your fellow means not only your fellow Jew, but your fellow pious Jew. And kamocha b'torah b'mitzvos. And the obligation of loving, what's usually the mitzvah of Ahavas Yisrael, only applies to other Jews who are observant according to many interpretations, or at least who are not the heretics, even if they're not fully observant. Now that doesn't mean that we have to hate other people, that there is not an obligation to love. There's an obligation to love thy neighbor, thy fellow, and also a special additional obligation to love the convert, which is a double mitzvah, because it's a double commandment, because it's both honoring it's both loving him as a neighbor and loving him as a convert, as a stranger. So that's a double mitzvah. So again, one may honor their parents even if one is not obligated to do so, and one is rewarded for honoring parents even if they're not obligated to do so, but they are not necessarily But if they're not obligated when it comes to an issue like this, there are certain exceptions. Not only, and let's talk about someone who's Jewish already. Let's say a parent opposes a marriage match. You're under no obligation to not marry this person that you intend to marry just because your parents refuse to give their blessing on the marriage. Things like that. And there are a few other examples. I believe it includes also leaving the Holy Land if one is settled there, studying Torah, going to learn in yeshiva. These types of pursuits, one is under no obligation to honor their parents if their parents disagree. And that's talking about someone who's Jewish, even if the parents are religious. So then we go a little further, though, and then we have the question of the parents, of fearing one's parents, which seems is an obligation. Let's say if you have a Jewish parent who is not observant, one still has the obligation to fear them. However, that very verse in Exodus that says, Ish that a person has obligated right? Ish es imay ves aviv tira'u, v'shamsay tishmaru. A man is obligated to fear his mother and his father, and to observe my Sabbath. Which means to say that if a parent tells a child to violate the Sabbath, one is not allowed to follow that the conflict of interests. You cannot you can't pick your parents over God. And so if a parent tells you to do something that goes against God's commandment, then they're under no obligation to do that thing that the parent tells them to do. So that, and again, this is under the rubric of the person who is Jewish, who is obligated in these things. The non-Jew, again, it sounds very uncomfortable. The non-Jew, who they convert, and even their parents convert with them, lose their relationship with their parent in a technical way. And the rabbis reconstructed a relationship of parent and child in order to not make Judaism look silly, pretty much. So what I mean is, obviously, whether a Jew or a non-Jew, you can't marry your mother, right? Both under the Mosaic Code, that's clear, and also under the Noahide Code. But if the if a mother and a son both convert, but we say by the biblical law they technically could get married because they're no longer mother and son. But the rabbis instituted a law to say that they cannot get married because otherwise it would look ridiculous. It would be ridiculous. You're converting to a new religion and you have less obligations under this religion's rules than you did before you converted, and not only less obligations, but it's a disgusting thing, to do such a thing. It's shameful and evil, and so even if by the letter of the law something might, under a biblical law, be permitted, it goes against the spirit of the law, and so then the rabbis enacted a law to mimic the biblical law. That's what we have there. So let's take this a little further. That means also, though, that there's no obligation to honor parents because they're no longer parents of children. But again, if you do it, you're doing the right thing. It's within the realm of what the Torah, has for us. So when it comes to this issue, and so yes, it's better to honor one's parents, even non-Jewish parents, and also the simple thing of what we call a karas hatov, of gratitude. Even if you don't have an obligation specifically to honor your parents, you have an obligation to show gratitude to any human being who benefits you, which includes your parents, both under the obligation to honor the parents and without the obligation. And so Judaism, the laws of Judaism are not necessarily moral or ethical. They are merely simply legalistic. But the rabbis injected compassion into the laws to say that you do have to honor parents, even if, biblically speaking, one does not have the obligation to do so. With that being said, in the case where the parent is telling you don't convert, and you're already an adult, I would say over 18, you're emancipated, you love your parents and you want to show them respect, but you found something in your life that is eternal and infinitely more important. So you're not doing so out of spite or anger or disrespect to your parents, but out of love of God. So therefore, it is not a sin to convert to Judaism against the wishes of your parents, just like it's not a sin for the Jew who's born Jewish and whose parents are not religious to become religious, even if the parents oppose him becoming religious. However, everything has to be taken in stride, and every case is different, and certainly it would be irresponsible for any Beis Din, any rabbinical court, to, even though legally they could convert a child, a teenager who's already intelligent enough to make this decision, if he or she is under 18 and his parents oppose the conversion, no rabbinical court should do that conversion. But once they are legally, by the laws of this country, an adult, they can there's no reason not to convert just because a parent opposes the conversion. Now, being a non-Jew who wants to convert, you have to make that decision though. Which is more important to you, because you're under no obligation to convert, and once you convert in the eyes of this faith, you're stuck with it. Now, you can stop believing in it, so it wouldn't matter much to you, but it is what it is. So, that's essentially what we find here, is that you have to make that decision. The same thing if you're married and your wife doesn't want to convert, or your husband doesn't want to convert. And you can't be married to someone who's not Jewish, so it means that your marriage will be over. Now, I would first of all say that the rabbi should try to convince the spouse to convert that doesn't want to convert. Show them how beautiful Judaism is. And it should not be breaking up marriages over conversions. But sometimes, quite often, it happens that the couple makes that decision and the marriage is not functional anymore, and one partner converts and one spouse converts, and that is what it is. So these are the decisions that you have to make on your own, and the truth is, on the other hand, you might want to tell the person, maybe you don't want to convert just because the fact that your parents oppose it or your spouse opposes it might be consideration why you might not want to convert, or push it off a bit, wait and see. Those types of situations are where it might be worthwhile in certain situations to push off the conversion and wait a bit and think about it a little bit more. Everybody's different. So that's essentially the message that I have here, is that legally, even really for a teenager under 18, there's no obligation for the potential convert to listen to his parents, even from a rabbinical standpoint. If he wants to convert, he can convert, and that's it. But from a common sense perspective, from a compassionate perspective, and from a perspective to not make our faith look foolish, to not, just like this issue of the marriage issue that would essentially almost make legalized incest, and that's why the rabbis prohibited it, and that's an actual legal prohibition. It's a rabbinical prohibition that's binding, that you cannot make this kind of legalized incest, even if biblically it might be technically permitted. The rabbis are able to create fences around the Torah to protect the Torah. In a more colloquial sense, this is not legally binding. We don't want Judaism to look like a cult, and I don't think you want it to look like a cult. Meaning, if you are a teenager, I don't know how old you are, but if you're a teenager living in your parents' home, you can't do that, because it's going to make Judaism look bad. and I don't say that just, because I'm Jewish and I want to protect my people, but more because I'm Jewish and want to protect my faith and not make people come to hate this faith, not come to hate God. We have this idea in the Talmud that, depending on how a person conducts themselves, if they are polite, if they are, etc., and they are a student of Torah, people look at that and and if they are nice, polite, that they're cheretz, it makes Judaism look good. It makes the Torah look good. It makes God look good. And if they are not, if they they ostensibly appear to be religious, and they're not conducting themselves in a way that gains people's favor, it makes Judaism look bad. It makes God look bad. So these are the concepts of the Kiddush Hashem and the Chilul Hashem, the sanctification of the name of the Lord, and the desecration of the name of the Lord. That we are, and again, non-Jews are not enjoined in this obligation the way Jews are, but it's something that Jews certainly are enjoined to do. And so the Beis Din, the court, cannot create a Chilul Hashem, cannot desecrate God's name by converting someone, a teenager, that the parents don't want them to convert. It makes it look like a cult. It makes it look ridiculous. It's an insult to God, and it makes people hate God. It makes people hate religion. Now maybe someone's going to bring up this question that we brought up with the East Ramapo School District. Well, is that a Chilul Hashem? Is that, And again, a lot of these things are blown out of proportion. It would be a Chilul Hashem to do something wrong, like take public school money that's not allowed to be used for private schools and send it to private schools. But there is a certain amount for certain needs in a public school. In a private school in New York, they are entitled to certain funds, and as taxpayers, they're entitled to those funds. So, like for school bus or for computers and for other aspects, secular school books and things, the school district pays for those in the private schools. Private schools don't have to take that money, but they can, and there's no reason not to, and it's not a Chilul Hashem to do so. No, so it's not a Chilul Hashem to vote to keep, school taxes low, and things like that. So, these types of questions, are, they have to be qualified, and I understand there are different views with these issues. I understand there are some rabbis who are very adamant that it's wrong to put any, Orthodox Jew on the board of the school district, but the fact of the matter is that they're paying taxes. America was built on no taxation without representation. There's no reason not to vote according to your interests, just like someone who perhaps doesn't have children at all might vote, to keep the school taxes low, or other people, various people have various reasons why they might do that. And again, I understand there's two sides to all of these questions, but we have to be balanced. And there's not one answer that represents the entire Jewish community on these questions either. So essentially, that's the message that we have here, is that legally you're under no obligation to listen to your parents. They don't want you to convert. You can go ahead and convert. But morally and ethically, it's something that you have to think about and should not rush into without contemplating it. So, thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, subscribe, comment. See you later.